I don't know how one that comes to this festival can resist a film written by one of Hollywood's best noir screenwriters, Sidney Bohm, adapted from a compelling crime novel by William Heath. This film is in scope, is in color, it's gorgeous. It was shot on location in mostly Bisbee, Arizona, and also in Tucson. And I have to say, I have never met a kinder and more considerate and talented gentleman than Dick Fletcher, until I got to meet his son, Mark Fleischer, who is our guest tonight, who is here with his wife, Susan. And give Mark a really well-deserved round of applause.
I've sat among many audiences in my life and seen many, many movies. To sit among you and to hear you appreciate every nuance of the direction, of the writing, of the action, of the staging, is one of the great privileges of my life. Thank you. Honestly, I can't tell you how much I appreciate your appreciation and love of this, of the movies and the genre.
Mark, that's great. That's great. And how long had it been since you'd seen this? Had you seen this recently on the big screen? Do you have any memories of it?
Yeah, I saw it about 70 years ago. I don't have a whole lot of memories of the movie, but there were, what's really important about this, I don't know if any of you have read my father's book, Just Tell Me When to Cry.
It's one of the best Hollywood memoirs, and I'm not just saying that. It is Just Tell Me When to Cry. It is his father, and his father really comes to life in that, his wit and his dry humor and his morality.
Yes, it is, and it's not a tell-all book. He just stays out of the way and tells the story, just like David Niven did. And it was really important to my father because, you know, he idolized Sylvia Sidney when he was growing up, and he thought this was one of the great movie stars ever.
Right.
And the fact that he had an opportunity to direct Sylvia Sidney just blew him away.
Mm-hmm.
So he had never met her before he encountered her after they shot the scenes on the location. They went back to the studio at Fox, and he was introduced to her for the first time in her trailer. And he asked everybody to stand away. He just wanted to talk to her because she was his big idol who was like so intelligent and knew everything about movies. So she sat there because she was a great crocheter. And she sat there crocheting, and my father explained to her the backstory of the movie and the backstory of her. And she just sat there and didn't look up at him. So then he started to explain the backstory of her parents. And he got into the deep psychology of everything. And she was just crocheting. And at the end, she looked up at him, and she said to my father, "Well, it's very interesting, Mr. Fleischer, but you know, I'm very good at crying. So whenever you need tears, just tell me when to cry." And he said to her, "God damn it." And they both broke up laughing, and they became really good friends. And it was very interesting because he learned many years after that she had heard that he had named his book after her saying to him, "Just tell me when to cry." And she was in hysterical laughter. She thought it was the funniest thing she ever heard.
Your father's early career, obviously, I think that's what first brought him to my attention, even though I grew up watching his films, because the depth and breadth of his career was so extraordinary, from, you know, The Narrow Margin, Armored Car Robbery, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, Compulsion, The Vikings, into The Boston Strangler, and all the way into the third remake of The Jazz Singer. But when you were growing up, your father was at RKO, he was under contract, and the movie industry was completely different. And I remember stories that you have told me about, your father working under the production chief at RKO that was there, I think, when Hughes bought the studio in '48. A very interesting fellow named Sid Rogel, who was both a mentor and tormentor of your father. What were your recollections growing up listening to Sid Rogel?
Well, many, I must say.
Yeah.
My father began his book saying, I knew everyone. I knew the greats, the near greats, and the ingrates. And my father arrived in Hollywood, and he was directing B-level movies. And that was the age of the film noir. And Sid Rogel was the head of that unit. And he took my father around and introduced him to everybody. And it was interesting because my father, went through the studio system and directed a movie that really broke through into a different kind of category, which was the narrow margin. Now, the movie before that was a movie that was originally called Target. And Earl Felton, who was a great screenwriter that my father loved to work with, was the screenwriter on that movie. And the first third of the movie was building up an incredible intensity about what the movie was about. And they were forming a group of people who were going to do a crime that no one has ever done before. And it became clear after a third of the movie that they were going to rob an armored car. They called it Target. So just before they started the ad campaign, the studio, in its great wisdom, renamed the movie Armored Car Robbery. And my father and Earl became apoplectic. Then they did The Narrow Margin,
Right.
which had kind of a breakthrough. And at the time, Howard Hughes wouldn't let a movie be released unless he saw it. So he let Narrow Margin sit in his screening room for about a year.
Hughes was also, I don't know, to use the colloquial expression, nuts. Because when I was doing research on my book, I found a memo of about 15 pages that Hughes sent to Jim Wilkinson, the head of the editing department. And what Hughes would do to your father and other filmmakers is he'd let them make the film and then take it, as you said, hold on to it in a screening room, and then say, well, could you reshoot this with Robert Mitchum and Jane Russell, and could you have Charles McGraw do somersaults on top of the train as it's moving, and all of this stuff. So your father did want to get out of there.
Well, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
And he refused to, and he refused to take the assignments. And so he got suspended. And Sid Rogel had to deliver the news to him. So we were taught a little rhyme as children, and that was Sid Rogel, son of a bitch. And my brother and my sister wasn't born yet, but my brother and I taught that. And then whenever we drove past the studio, RKO, we were taught to lean out the window and spit at it. And it became known as the Spit Building. Now, it's an interesting comparison when you take Howard Hughes and compare Howard with Daryl Zanuck.
Right.
Because Howard Hughes was so almost psychotically detail-oriented. And he had a meeting one day with my father and Earl Felton, and Earl was afflicted with polio at an early age. He walked on a cane and a crutch. And so he had to have regular meals. And they went to the Beverly Hills Hotel, where Howard Hughes had his bungalow. And they started early in the morning, and it went on and on and on. And finally, Earl said, Howard, I have to have something to eat. I'm dying here, because his metabolism needed it. And Howard was mortified, and he apologized. And he ran over the phone, and he grabbed the phone, and Earl was thinking, okay, a steak and some scotch and some ice cream. Howard picked up the phone and ordered him a glass of milk. There was this eccentricity. And you compare it with Daryl Zanuck, because this movie was the first movie that my dad made for Fox. And he got exposed to the mogul Darryl for the first time. And he would have script meetings, which weren't really meetings, they were diatribes. And he had a room that was on the side, and then he had a meeting room. You'd go to the meeting room, and he would come in, and he would pace back and forth, and he would like dictate. And
While swinging a polo mallet.
he had a pole mallet in his hand, and he was afraid he might bash the brains out of it.
Yeah.
And he would count exact steps in and out of the rooms. And he would like talk himself into and out of different types of arguments. And like Tommy Noonan, he would say, he's got a great face, but no, he's not good enough. But it goes back and forth. So finally, they managed to make the movie and get past all of that. And I remember that when Dick Zanuck left Fox and became an independent producer, my father made a very interesting observation that he was a much better manager of a studio than he was a filmmaker. He really didn't know how to make a movie.
Now this is Richard Zanuck, the son, after he...
No, this was Dick Zanuck when he became independent producer.
Right, Darryl's son.
That's right,
Darryl's son.
This was, my mistake, this was Darryl Zanuck.
Right.
When he became an independent producer.
Oh, okay.
And I remember being on the set of Crack in the Mirror.
Mm-hmm.
And that was Orson Welles, and it was Darryl Zanuck. And my father was directing a scene in Paris, and it was outside. And I was watching, and Darryl Zanuck was standing next to me, and he said, "Come over here, kid." I came over, and he had the first electric razor. And it was run on batteries. And Darryl Zanuck gave me my first shave.
Oh, God.
Now, this was interesting because they were filming, they had the studio of Babylon.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember coming out of my father's office, and I looked down the hall to my right, and I was like really young, and I saw Orson Welles, who filled the entire corridor. In front of him was Darryl Zanuck, who was like really small, but with a cigar bigger than he was. And in front of him was his little dog, Iago. And I took one look at this comic scene and I burst out laughing. Fortunately, my brother was behind me, who was a little older, and understand my dad could get fired if I laughed too hard. And he threw me back into my father's office so that these folks could go on past us.
Now, in addition to your father, your grandfather, Max Fleischer, we have him to thank every time we watch a Popeye or a Betty Boop cartoon, the great Max Fleischer. And there was an interesting situation in your house when the name Walt Disney was mentioned.
Yeah, my grandfather, who was the sweetest man on earth, became apoplectic. He would fall on the floor and scream. After it was the narrow margin, where my father started to gain a real reputation. He got a call from his agent saying, "I got a very strange call. Walt Disney wants to see you in the studio tomorrow." And my dad said, "Why?" And the agent said, "I think it's Charlie Feldman." "I don't know, just go." So my father went to Walt Disney's studio, which was being in the lair of the Lyons. And Disney had a bunch of artwork that had Nautiluses and all sorts of things. And he said to my father, "I'm about to make the most expensive movie that Hollywood has ever made." And it was his first completely live-action movie.
Right.
And he said, "Have you ever read Jules Verne, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea?" And my father said, "Yes," and I loved it. And Disney said, "I want you to direct it." And my father was astounded. He said, "Do you know who I am?" And Disney said, "Yes, you're Max's son." And my father said, "Well, you know what, I would love to direct your movie, but I have to ask my father's permission. Because I don't want to be a traitor to the family." So my father in those days put a call through to New York and talked to his father, my grandfather, and explained the situation. And of course my grandfather said, "Are you crazy? Of course direct that movie. That's your big chance." And Max, my grandfather, grandfather said to my father, I want you to tell Walt Disney one thing. Tell him he has great taste in directors.
Now, your grandfather and Disney were at one point very bitter rivals.
Bitter enemies.
Bitter enemies. And there was eventually a kind of very nice coda to that relationship. How did that work?
Well, Walt Disney became a friend of the family after 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And I grew up knowing him as Uncle Walt. And you know, you see the scenes of his big train in his backyard. I was actually on that train at one point. He was a very reckless driver, I must say. And my father was on the phone with Walt one day, and he mentioned that his father was coming to Los Angeles for an anniversary. And Walt said, I want you to extend an invitation to your father to come to my studio. Because my grandfather's studio had closed long before, and most of his animators were now working for Walt Disney. And he said, I would like to host a reunion of your father and all of his animators. So my grandfather accepted, and there's a picture we still have in our house that has all the animators, my father, my grandfather, and Walt Disney, with all of their original signatures. And that day, those two men reconciled. And they became friends for the rest of their lives.
And that is a sweet story from Hollywood.
That's a real Hollywood story.
Yeah.
And many of them are like that, by the way.
Mark, one of the things that so impressed me about your dad, not only in talking with him, but in watching his movies, is his meticulousness on how he did everything. When I researched the narrow margin, he and Stanley Rubin, but I guess more your father, actually had the shots storyboarded. And when we, Eddie and I and Film Art Foundation, Flicker Alley, restored Trapped, I went to USC, went to your father's papers, and I couldn't find a whole lot. And then the librarian at Ed Comstock says, oh, I have Richard Fleischer's script. Would you like to look at that? And I go, yeah. So I looked at it, I opened it up, and there's a chase scene all through Hollywood, and your father diagrammed all the streets, all the camera placements for all of this. And what was his attention to detail, and how did he operate? How did he operate his sets on his movies? Because I know you were on there from the late 50s going forward.
Yeah, I was on there as an observer, and I actually made a movie with him that he invited me to become his protege and learn how to make movies, because he wouldn't let anybody into his private life. But he was very meticulous, and I saw his shot lists. You know, I would see my dad's shot list, and he would go through every single angle, and he would show what angle and what he would do, and it was really amazing. But he was also, in personal life, he was a very sweet, gentle, loving man. On the set, he was a real authoritarian, and he didn't cross the British crews that used to work for him. They named him the Iron Butterfly. And that's exactly right. And I saw him, he had a rule that the still cameraman could not take a picture while the actors were actually acting. After they finished the scene, they could do some photographs. Because when an actor saw a cameraman with the camera, he would always stop and pose. And my father said, I don't want that. You know, they need to be, acting for the scene. And there was one cameraman, a photographer, who took a picture, and my father stopped it, and he said, out! And he threw that and ever from coming back. He was very, very tough.
I told you the story over dinner when I spent a day with Kirk Douglas, with Patrick Francis filming him, and he had a big poster of the Vikings up in his office. So he had the ultimate I love myself wall with all of his pictures. And I mentioned that I knew your father casually, and Kirk said, what did he say about me? And I said, well, Kirk, to be frank, he said, you don't make a picture with Kirk Douglas, you survive it. And Kirk said, that's true. Well, you were on the set of the Vikings. How did it go?
Well, it's interesting because the first movie my dad made with Kurt was 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. They got along very well.
Right.
And my father really loved Kurt. And then Kurt became a bigger star.
And a producer.
Yeah. And so he did 20,000 Leagues, then he did the Vikings. And Kurt became kind of difficult. I mean, one instance I remember my father telling me is that Kurt would go like this. He would say, "I have my arms like this. What do you think?" And my father would say, "Well, that's fine." We'd say, "Well, don't you think they should be like this?" My father would say, "I don't give a frig where you have your arms, just say your arms." And he was really kind of difficult, but he also did a wonderful thing. There were three children who was on the entire shoot in Norway and in Germany. It was myself and my brother and Jack Carve, the cinematographer's son, Peter Carve. And Kurt made little Viking costumes for each of us. And I had Tony Curtis's one, who had the hand cut off. And there were scenes coming up, a very dramatic scene. We were in France, and the whole company had assembled outside in the morning to go to the set. It was Fort Lallat, which was built in 1060. And they had a battering ram that would, run through the doors. If it missed the doors, it would knock the entire castle down, so they had to be very careful. And I had my little Viking costume on, and I had studied that scene, and I memorized Kurt's role. And it was coming up, and Kurt was there in costume too. And I was like 7 or 9 or something, and I suddenly drew my sword. And I turned to Kurt and I said, "Odin must have sent you to me. Where is Morgana?" Kurt drew his sword, and he played the entire scene speaking Tony Curtis's lines with me like I was a real professional actor. And finished, and everyone applauded, and he took me in his arms and he lifted me up, and my father was almost in tears. It was really wonderful.
That's a great memory. In talking to your father, and I asked the kind of family question, what's your favorite film? And I thought he would give me well, that's like asking me who my favorite child is or grandchild. But he but right away he said Compulsion. He said that, were you on the set for that, and do you remember anything about that film at all? Because he loved it.
Well, not a whole lot. I was a little bit young for that. Right. But I know that was, he always loved psychological dramas, and that really sort of delved into what, he wanted to be a psychiatrist. That was his dream, and he went to Brown University and studied pre-med. And then he met, after he graduated Brown, he went to my grandfather. And he started directing the Brown Brothers at Brown, and he fell in love with the theater. He was bitten by the theater bug. And he didn't know what to do when he graduated. He didn't know whether to do a medical school or to drama school. And my grandfather said to him, and this is a great lesson in parenting, and he said, "You know what, go to drama school, at least for a year, eat, sleep, drink it, because if you don't, you'll regret it for the rest of your life. Learn whether or not it's for you." And so he did, and then he went to Yale, where he was bitten by another bug, which called my mother. Met my mother there. And that was a great moment in parenting, and I kind of like to talk about the parallel, because I think my grandfather and my grandmother were conscious of my father and his sister having to live in a kind of an unreal world of the celebrity that they were in. And my parents actually very much followed the same role with me and my siblings. And I remember once when I was about 21, and I was in England, and we'd just done the royal premiere for Dr. Dolittle. And one of our great family friends, Edward Hamholt, was there. He was going out to Paris, and my parents were going somewhere I didn't know where they were going. But Eddie said to me, "Why don't you come to Paris with me?" and we'll spend a couple of days and then go on to Los Angeles. So we did. And we went to the first night in Paris in a little bistro, and who should show up in the bistro but my parents? I didn't know they were going to be there. So they joined us for dinner, and then John Huston walked in, who they had a relationship with, and so now Huston and his entourage sat down, so we had a big table, and I was sitting next to John. I'd never met him before, and he kind of took a liking to me. I was a 21-year-old kid, and patted me on the shoulder and said, "My boy," and he taught me how to like cut a cigar and drink it through cognac, take the smoke through the cognac. And I was about to go back to LA the next day with Eddie, and Houston said to me, "Why don't you come to me in my castle in Ireland?" Where he had a castle in Ireland where the servants dressed in livery.
Fox hunts and all
That's the whole thing. And I thought, this was pretty cool. You know, I'm 21 years old. I got to go to Ireland. And I looked at my father, and he was going, "No way." And that was a great moment in parenting, that he would expose us enough to the world so that we understood it, this world of celebrity, but he never let it go too far.
Well, I tell you, we could keep going on and on. Your dad was such a craftsman, such a larger than life person himself, and I'll never forget the last public appearance that I remember he did was at the Egyptian Theater when we were showing Bandito. And I believe at the end of that movie, Robert Mitchum waves like that, and your dad was getting up and leaving, and he waved back at the screen. And it was very touching. That was the last time that I saw him. So I think everyone should give Mark a big wave for being here tonight.
I wave you.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
You are the people for which this lives. Thank you.